I actually spoke with an organization recently that said to me, they don't have any talent in their company. And I'm like, okay, because my perspective is that everyone is talent. If we think about everyone fighting over a really small pool of top talent, that seems utterly ridiculous when we have so many people in our organizations that could and want to deliver more. Really, our role in employee experience design is thinking about everyone having a lot of potential, unlocking that versus fighting over this tiny top pool of talent that we want to pay ridiculous sums for.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. On Work for Humans, we've spoken to plenty of designers of all different kinds, but no one who is actually an employee experience designer. I'm so excited to bring in an EX expert today by the name of Samantha Gadd. Samantha began her career in HR, but she quickly noticed that traditional HR processes and practices often overlooked the people they were meant to serve. Struggling to find the human in human resources, she took a leap of faith and founded Humankind, an organization dedicated to putting humanity at the center of work. Today, Humankind is New Zealand's leading employee experience consultancy, partnering with over 1,200 organizations to create more human-centered workplaces that prioritize employee well-being and drive business success. In 2022, Samantha also led a group of 34 contributors to co-author the EX Manifesto, which defines key principles of EX design. Signed by leaders in over 30 countries, this document represents a global commitment to reimagining employee engagement and well-being. In this episode, Samantha and I talk about her journey from HR to EX, who funds EX in organizations, and the links between workplace culture and employer brand. We also discuss the origin and principles of the EX Manifesto, the curriculum of the EX Design School, the values of EX that reframe success metrics, and other topics. As always, don't forget to subscribe to Work for Humans wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay connected. And now, I'm excited to bring you my conversation with Samantha Gadd. Samantha Gadd, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much, Dart. So happy to be here.
This is a show about the design of work, but I have had very few, maybe zero, people on the show who actually are in the employee experience line of work. Now, I've had all sorts of designers, largely experienced designers, so ritual designers, people who bring together 100 artists at a time to make an art event for one person, all sorts of odd, interesting designers, but weirdly, no actual EX people. So today we get to talk to you, and I'm very excited about it, in part because we get to talk about the EX Manifesto. And I love manifestos because they sound like they happen just before a revolution, and also the EX curriculum. But before we get to that, I want to ask how you got here. Did you arrive at employee experience from a design background or from an HR background? And either way, you had to go through some transformation to get to EX.
I certainly did. So my whole background has been HR, people and culture. I started my career in it, I'm still in it. I have spent my whole career trying to move HR, people and culture to this kind of more modern or product-led or design-led way of thinking. And I've felt at many, many times quite disillusioned by the impact that we can make in HR and people and culture. But yeah, just to give you very much the highlight reel of my career, born and bred New Zealander, had a pretty short career in employed HR roles. My last permanent job was about 16 years ago, working for a law firm here in New Zealand, leading out their HR function for the Wellington office. And it was really at that time where I started to also become a little bit disillusioned with the sort of politics and paperwork feeling of HR. I left to go out on my own and do independent consulting. And that led to me starting my first company, which is called Humankind. And that was 12 years ago now. Humankind has worked with over 1,200 organizations across New Zealand building better workplaces. About 3 years into building Humankind, which is a professional services company, I listened to a podcast that changed my life. And anyone that's heard me talk has heard me tell this story. But Mark Levy, very first global head of employee experience from Airbnb, was being interviewed on a Future of Work podcast, and he was talking about employee experience. It was the first time I'd heard those two words together, but it was seriously the moment I realized that this is the future of HR. At that time, there was very little in the way of what is employee experience, frameworks to look at an organization, an individual, or a team through an EX lens, and certainly no ways of working in EX. But I just deeply believed that we could take inspiration from CX and UX, which are grown as massive functions, to do it differently. So my Humankind team and I really embarked on defining the space, turning our business into an employee experience business. And then fast forward to 2020, when we were having a conversation about how we have more impact with the work that we do. So our purpose at Humankind is to lead humanity at work. We have a deep belief that human-centered workplaces are going to be the successful workplaces of the future. And we were really thinking about how do we have more impact against our purpose? And at that time, this is 2020, we were still talking to so many predominantly HR folk and business leaders about employee experience and employee experience design. And really very, very few people got it or understood these ways of working. And so I actually took myself away for a couple of weeks and built version 1 of Employee Experience Design School, which is still going today, to really teach others how to go from being an HR professional to an employee experience designer. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that later. But my obsession about new ways of working, taking a design-led approach, being employee-centric, which is wildly different to how most HR teams operate as company-centric teams, is crazier than ever, I suppose. So I've been in this space forever, and I really am so proud to be an employee experience designer. And I feel like I maybe didn't have that pride when I thought of myself in HR. So it's been a real transformational time for me as a leader, as a practitioner, and as a founder to learn about this new way of working.
When EX people get together and you're sitting around having a beer, what are some of the most common recurring conversations? And some of them can be hopeful and some of them can be despairing. There's probably both. What are they?
Great question. Wow. In this current environment, I would say it's pretty tough. So a lot of people teams are sort of lacking in investment, have had tools and resources pulled away from them. And also employee experience. I've had so many people say the pendulum swung back to employers. And I'm like, funny thing about pendulums is that they also swing back. And, I really don't believe that that's a reason why we shouldn't invest in this space. So I think there's a little bit of doom and gloom out there with employee experience practitioners that really believe that taking this design-led approach is the best way, because this whole go slow to go fast, which we all understand in design, is real. On a hopeful perspective, when I sit around with employee experience designers, people are always so surprised and delighted by what they learn when they do true discovery employees at the center, and how that really changes the shape of what they are designing and the outcomes and the success of those initiatives with organizations. So we believe that this is the right way. It's a bit of a challenging environment for us right now, but I'm not giving up.
Do you have a hypothesis of what pulls organizations away from an investment in EX?
I think we're not the only function in an organization or the only skill set in an organization which has a bit of a grey fuzzy line to the bottom line of an organization. And so I think not being able to see immediate business results would be the number one thing. In a cost-constrained environment, which we're currently in, New Zealand is in full recessionary mode just about, and certainly other places in the world are challenged as well. And you're doing cost-cutting and reducing headcount, et cetera. It's a difficult business case to make. I would also say, actually, Dar, if I can add one more thing, organizations are very much led on very short-term results. So most CEOs are there to improve profit and get short-term results, maybe over a 1 to 3 year period. And the reality is investments in this, just like in product design, they're not necessarily quick to show the outcomes. And so having a leader or leadership team that want to invest in the long term, especially in the people space, is harder to find.
I will tell you some data on that you will be happy to hear. I had Bart Houlihan on the show. He's one of the founders of B-Lab, but he's also started an exchange-traded fund, which is you can now buy a portfolio of stocks that have proven good employee experience. And he pointed out that the return on investment on employee experience can be as low as 2 years. It's just not obviously direct, right? And so that was, I think, very encouraging.
I really like that. I think anything that we can have that helps us to build the business case. And also, a lot of us in this space, we've really got to flex that influencing muscle and ability to influence to get leaders and organizations to try a new approach is a key skill set we must develop and continue to strengthen.
Who buys EX? What part of an organization is most likely to be funded to do it?
Very good question. So I think there's a couple of different buyers. You might have a chief people officer who is really wanting to try a new approach because they've maybe wasted time and resources on initiatives that haven't landed or haven't had the success that they should have. You might have a CEO that really believes in design and product-led thinking and now wants to give that a go on the inside of his organization, his or her organization. And then lastly, I think organizations that are, or parts of the organization that I think are more willing to adapt is when you're really thinking about the customer experience. And if you've got a leader in there that believes and understands that you cannot deliver customer experience without employee experience. So it might even be a call center or like a very much the front of house for an organization. Once you start unpacking why the CX is going wrong there, it generally leads to an EX challenge.
Well, it's been interesting talking to people who do sell services related to EX, and CX is one of the customers. CX often feels on the outside too. They often feel that they're not able to get the funding or the resources to actually be successful. So depending too much on CX as a buyer can be a thin thread.
Agree. I think that CX probably has an easier job than EX though. So that's sad, isn't it?
Oh, I know. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. In the EX world, when it is being executed, what percentage of the time would you say it's HR saying, let's fix our HR services versus HR or somebody else saying, let's change the experience of work overall? There's this Venn diagram, I guess it is a Venn diagram, which is there's parts of the experience that HR creates and is responsible for. And then there's parts of the experience that the business creates and executes against. And then there's the overlap where there's sort of in-betweens. So the question is, when people do get funding for it, how often do you see it being not about work in general, but about HR services?
I would say majority, to be honest.
HR services.
Yes, because EX, and we debated this a lot when we wrote the Employee Experience Manifesto, where does EX live? Because there's an argument to say that it actually lives outside of HR, mostly because the skills and experience required to do EX is actually not a natural fit with how HR has developed over the years. But actually, in almost every organization, EX is seen as the responsibility of HR. So it's often started with the HR services being improved.
You implied that the practice of HR has a set of norms or a set of instincts or a set of pre-existing beliefs. What's in there?
I mean, I know this deeply because this was my experience. There's a lot of unlearning that we need to do to take an employee experience approach. A couple of key examples are HR used to set the agenda, the calendar of all the things that would happen for employees during the year. It would be set by what HR and the organization needed. That now flips inside, and the employees really should be driving that if you were taking an EX approach. There's a real obsession, and has been for a long time in HR, around using best practice and looking to best practice for how to go about particular initiatives or projects. The reality is best practice by very nature is old practice, and the challenges that organizations face today don't have an answer. So we need to have different ways of working to actually design with our employees new practice. And that not relying on experience and what we've seen work before is really hard. It takes a lot of courage, and it takes a totally different skill set. Instead of your expertise and experience being the things that are most valued for you in a HR leadership role, your facilitation skills, curiosity, and design capability becoming more important. They're two totally different skill sets. So it's a lot of unlearning actually for HR practitioners. And part of that data is also how an organization interacts with HR. An organization and leaders come to HR for answers, for advice, and for solutions. They don't really come to be asked more questions and to dig into discovery. That's not how they've been trained to use HR. So it's also not only do we have to reskill ourselves as practitioners and leaders in this space, but we also need to reposition our functions and retrain leaders in the organization about how we do our job and what to expect when they come to us. It's not an easy or quick thing to do.
So I'll tell you what didn't make it into the Harvard Business Review article that we were talking about ahead of time. The article that just got published by me and by Eric Anisich focuses on work as a product, employees as customers, which is, I really believe. But what didn't make it in was the idea that that means that all companies are multi-sided businesses. So they have two customers, both of whom need to be satisfied in order for the other to be satisfied. And one of the root causes that I think needs to be disrupted is that when you have a multi-sided business, you have very ring-fenced funding and very ring-fenced decision-making for one customer and for the product that's going to them. And HR is the other side of the model. It's just the one side that says employees are an input to production and we need to make them productive in order to make them able to create the strategy. And that's driven largely by who pays HR, which is that the people who pay HR are very distant from the experience of the workforce. And it takes real organizational willpower to say, no, we're a different business model from that. And that contextual change could actually create a way forward. You're nodding. So this sounds like things you've thought about.
I have very strong opinions on this. So I think an organization actually only has one set of customers, and that is the employees. Because if the value exchange goes organization to employees, employees to customers, customers to bottom line, essentially, it's very difficult for an organization to provide value directly to customers without employees. Very, very difficult. However, employees can provide value directly to customers without the organization. That's the gig economy. So essentially, organizations have one job, and that is to serve employees. Employees will serve customers. Customers serve the bottom line. And until organizations understand that their number one job is to serve employees, it's going to be very difficult to get that investment.
Now, that's a different model, and I'm very, very interested in it. And I'll tell you why I look at the multi-sided business approach, which is that I believe that customers are providing the product work. They are suppliers of work that is going to flow to the workforce as value. In fact, you could probably do this with your circle, which is that probably you could flow the circle both directions and it would work both ways.
I actually think so too. And it's to the point where, like, to be honest, organizations will go extinct if they don't figure this out, because employees don't need the organization to work directly with customers. They just go join the gig economy, and probably the same way. So it's going to be interesting. And I think organizations that don't really start to deeply understand who their current workforce are and who the workforce of the future are, what they care about, how on earth are they supposed to serve them? I mean, I have so much more I could say on that, but we're not asking the right questions. We don't know who people are, and I don't know if we care enough.
All right, let's look at the EX Manifesto, because so much of what you just said is in there. So I'm going to tell people what this is. I'm going to tell people where to find it right now, because you might want to read along as we go through this. It's at exmanifesto.com, which is easy to find and easy to remember. It's a one-pager, really, and it lays out these principles. And I will tell you, I can tell it is very carefully crafted, because there are certain words in it that are used in very specific ways. So, apologies to listeners. I'm going to do some reading here, because I think it's worth getting this verbatim. Employee experience defines the moments that, together, shape workplace culture. While workplace culture itself cannot be designed, the experiences that shape workplace culture can. There are definitions and there's causation in that sentence, which I want to take apart. So first of all, workplace culture is defined as the collective experience of work. This helps me a lot in a lot of ways, which is whenever anybody says culture, I'm like, don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. Like, well, we need to work on our culture. When you swing the hammer to work on your culture, what do you actually hit? What this says is, if you're working on culture, you're working on the experience of work.
Yeah, exactly. And we were very careful about how we use the word culture in the Employee Experience Manifesto. First of all, we weren't going to use it because most leaders don't understand what culture is. And they say workplace culture is the way we do things around here, which for me, in my background, has never been helpful. If you want to improve culture, well, where do you start? But we really landed on using culture very deliberately in the Employee Experience Manifesto because I think every organizational leader will understand the importance of having a good culture, even if they don't know what it is. So really breaking down how you go about improving culture, which is really improving employee experience, all of those moments felt like it was going to be helpful for leaders.
I think it was the fourth person I spoke to, or the sixth person I spoke to in this podcast was Alder Yarrow. And he's an experienced designer, an experienced modeler. And he used almost exactly the same words to describe brand, which is that your brand is the sum of the experiences that you have of a particular product. And he said, so brand is experience design. And so I can certainly see that workplace culture and employer brand could be very closely related.
Yes, totally agree. And most organizations and leaders look at employer brand as like a marketing activity. But if we really think about employer brand or employee value proposition as being our opportunity to really honestly articulate what it really feels like to work in an organization so that we attract the right people in, we have to understand that it's our responsibility. I always talk about EVP being, or employee value proposition, or employer brand being the promise, and employee experience being the reality. And our job as leaders every day, not just for new people joining our organization, is to close the gap between the promise and the reality, which means we have to have an employer brand or employee value proposition that has been designed with employees so it accurately reflects the real story of what's happening in there. It's not too aspirational, it's not a marketing exercise. And then the employee experience also needs to be designed with employees to close that gap. But closing the gap between promise and reality has to be one of our number one jobs as leaders.
If employees couldn't talk, the idea that employer brand could work as a marketing practice would be fine. That's just not reality, which is that I'm not going to go to your website to understand your culture. I'm going to go to Glassdoor.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And so there's actually two more definitions here. I want to keep going with this. There's employee experience, EX, which is the individual experience of work. And so now what we have is we have workplace culture, which is the collective experience. Then we have employee experience, which is the individual experience. And then EX design, which is the mindful creation of employee experiences. That's very tidy. I like that a lot. There's a paragraph here that says, investing in EX elevates business performance through employee well-being. Organizations proactively improving their EX will outperform organizations reacting to employee pain points. In that paragraph, the word well-being has traditionally been used to mean not being harmed. I assume you mean more.
Absolutely. I mean, it's another way of saying employee happiness, employee satisfaction, employee engagement. When you're well at work, you are driven to succeed, you're driven to thrive. We all know the importance of people being well at work, and that's why we use that word well-being, because well-being does mean far more than just being safe. I think we all realize that, particularly over the COVID period, where employee well-being, mental, physical, emotional, became top of mind for almost every leader.
Was there a high point for EX during the beginning of the pandemic? The feeling like, no, we're getting some traction here.
It was really interesting. A lot of interesting things happened. We got pushed into the future really quickly in terms of flexible working, which I think has been great. And it's really interesting to see how organizations are now, in some cases, pulling that back. There was a really interesting thing that I saw happening across many organizations where leadership actually improved, because if you were working in an office and you had a one-on-one scheduled with your employee and you missed that one-on-one or it didn't happen, you could just rely on bumping into them at the water cooler or in the hallway or whatever. I don't think leaders were prioritizing conversations with employees. But when you're all of a sudden having to work in a flexible, hybrid, remote way, leaders had to have those conversations. And they also really had to ask, they were really felt in many cases they had to ask employees how they were, how they really were. And so I think leadership in some cases improved as well. It was a really hard time for leaders. I think leaders, and still today, are having the toughest employee experience. And one of the things I'm thinking about at the moment is actually maybe the job for an organization is really to serve leaders, because leader experience directly impacts employee experience, directly impacts customer experience. Our leaders are often the ones that we forget that they're employees too. And actually, they're having the hardest time at work because they're having to lead in this new environment and do their job and have financial constraints and all of those things. So Yeah, I think there were some high points for me were that increased focus on leadership.
Yeah, we've spoken about that on the show, how remote work is a leadership experience problem.
Sure is.
It's a leadership experience design problem because it feels like your company's dying, even though it may be thriving, but because you can't see it the way you used to be able to see it. After that, you have the values of EX. And these values reframe conversations and success metrics. When you talk about reframing conversations and success metrics, I believe it's also creating a different mental model, which is that that's the thing underlying so much. So work as enriching over work as extractive. That's what we were talking about before, which is that work that is flowing from the traditional customer toward employee customers is not a burden. It has value in and of itself. And that value is not being optimized. But so much of the framing that we have is that the only reason you work for me, because we assume you're lazy, is because I'm giving you money. You don't like work. I have to give it to you as a burden. And this says, no, work can be great. On this show, we've been exploring the principles of multi-sided management, which is the belief that work is a product that every company builds and delivers to employees. This struck a nerve. Work for Humans is in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. And along the way, people began to approach us, asking us how they could put multi-sided management into practice. And they were from all walks of business, line managers and CEOs, 3-person startups and multinationals and universities. But they all shared in common the belief that management practices of the last century are clearly not working. In response to this demand, I've pulled together a small team of some of the best people I have ever had the privilege to work with during my long career, who are also passionate about multi-sided management. And we formed a company 11-fold to serve the need. If you want your employees to feel more alive at work, you want happier teams, lower turnover, and you want tools that traditional management failed to give you to balance the needs of the company and the needs of your teams, let's talk. Employees give your company value it cannot survive without. When you fail to design great work, they will unsubscribe, either by leaving or even worse, by losing the ability to care. Join us at 11fold.com, spelled 11FOLD. Let's change management.
Yeah. These values are so fundamental when it comes to this EX Manifesto. And really, each of them came from some really compelling conversations we had when we were designing this as a group. And this is absolutely a collaborative exercise. We had a couple of people that had been at Patagonia for some time in the group, and Dean Carter particularly reminded us of a question that he used to ask people at Patagonia: do you get out more than you put in from the experience of work? And I was like, whoa, that is such a brave question. I don't know almost any leader that would ask that question, because I think most people would say no. But this was really that challenge for us of saying, it's not just about what an organization can extract. Individuals do absolutely extract value, whether that's through satisfaction, learning, it might change the way they live their lives in terms of how they work. And this having work as enriching over work as extractive, these are very much values which you can put on a spectrum, having one end and one at the other, and ask your leadership team, where would you place us? Where do you think our employees would place us? Where do we want to be? And what do we need to move up that scale? They're just really conversation starters. And I really believe, I've always found, I love what I do. I've always found that work adds so much more to my life than what it takes out. And I have that wish for everyone in the world, not just myself.
I love that question. Do you get more out of work than you put in?
It's kind of to say that as well. Like, are you a better human for working here? Are you a better contributor to your family, to your community, to your kids, to your spouse? All of those things can be improved, but often are not improved by work. So, work's got a long way to go, I think, in many organizations, but this is a great place to start, to think about what we're actually providing our employees in return for their efforts, not just a salary.
I love what you just said about, are you a better human as a result of work? And somebody that we've had on the show twice is Joe Pine. Joe Pine wrote the book, The Experience Economy. And he describes how things start off as goods, like a coffee bean, and then services, a cup of coffee, and then experiences, a cup of coffee in a nice cafe. But he goes all the way out to now transformations, and that there's a transformation economy. And some of work gives you things, and you get something new, and it's great. Or an experience, which is a memory. But the thing he says about the transformation economy is that you know it's the transformation economy when the output of the offering is you. You're different. And one of the things that we've talked about a little bit on the show is the idea that work makes the worker. In other words, there's hardly anything you do at work that doesn't transform you. It may not be capital T transformation, but the idea that work should aspire not just to be a service or even just an experience, but a transformation.
I love that. I love that a lot. And I think that that's been very true for me. And the reason I get out of bed every day, actually, is I really believe employees want to be treated as key stakeholders. They want to have a voice in the experiences and the decisions that impact them. Ultimately, they want agency. And when people have agency, you can transform through the experience of work. So I really love that. Transformation is what we're experiencing when we're doing the work that brings us joy, right? And in a way that brings us joy.
Yes. Yeah. The next one is unlocking talent over fighting for talent. Explain that one. I instinctively agree with it, but why was that an important thing to say?
This is really interesting. And it came from, again, one of the voices in the room. I actually spoke with an organization recently that said to me, they don't have any talent in their company. They've only hired for people that can do their roles. And I'm like, okay, because my perspective is that everyone is talent. Really interesting way of viewing things. I really, truly believe that anyone can be amazing with the right tools, experiences, leadership, context. It's up to us to help them to reach that point of being amazing. And I believe that people come to work to do a great job. I don't believe people come to work to not perform. And if we think about everyone fighting over a really small pool of top talent, that seems utterly ridiculous when we have so many people in our organizations that could and want to deliver more. So really our role in employee experience design is thinking about everyone having a lot of potential, everyone being talent, unlocking that versus fighting over this tiny top pool of talent that we want to pay ridiculous sums for. Of course, in some industries, you need deep expertise in one particular thing, and there is scarce numbers of people that do that. But if we think about this again on a spectrum, where are we in our organization when we think about talent planning and hiring? Are we thinking about really unlocking who we've got, or are we thinking more about fighting for the top few to bring them in?
I love that. There's almost like a physics to it too, which is that fighting for talent, the potential energy is we have to push things uphill. The metaphor is war. The metaphor is control. The metaphor is coercion. Whereas with unlocking, the metaphor is kindling. Or in other words, the potential energy is already there. It just needs to be catalyzed. And the metaphor is, for instance, gardening might be one, which is you just have to create an environment in which it can grow. It's a very subtle and powerful distinction. The next one is employee first over customer first. And that's what we were talking about before.
This was the pointiest. This was the hardest to land on. And it was also a value that there was a couple of really phenomenal contributors to this project who then opted out of being named contributors because of this value. And the reason being is that they had an organizational value that said customer first. And so they were like, I can't be named as being on this when our organizational value says customer first. And it was really hard because I'm a people pleaser and I like to be truly collaborative. And ultimately I had to, and it was me and a team, we had to really make a call of whether we wanted to be this pointy, but we did. And I'm so glad we did because of that conversation we had earlier around the value exchange. There's really only one way that I believe we can do this, and it is to be employee first. But it was absolutely, has been and is the pointiest part of this manifesto for sure.
Yeah. This one solution to that pointiness, which may just sort of defer the pointiness, is to say employees are customers. And then you can say customers are first. We just have more than one kind.
I feel like we need to be more direct with leaders because I think that might get lost potentially. I feel like this needs such a big push in a direction that we need to be pointier. I did a lot of research around what a manifesto needs to be, and it needs to be bleeding edge, and it needs to be something that lots of people won't agree with on first read. And this is the part of it that meets that criteria. And it doesn't have to be something that everyone agrees with.
It's something I said to my team recently. We put something out in the world. I don't even remember what it was anymore. And nothing happened. I think it was a particular posting that I did on LinkedIn that resulted in 1,700,000 views and no action.
Wow.
So,
that's a lot of views. Go you.
There's a lot of views, right? It's a lot of views. And what it made me feel like is that, wow, the world is inert. It's not going to change. And I said, I think we need to start throwing Molotovs. And so it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's already pointy to say employees are customers.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same. This inertia is real. And I feel like I've been banging on this drum for a decade plus now. And it's challenging, when I just don't see the change that I think is really needed. And I had an incredible meeting recently in New York City with a extremely experienced, extremely well thought of CHRO of a large company. And she actually said to me, I said, why haven't you invested in design capability in your HR team? How come that hasn't reached the top of your list? And she said, frankly, there's just so much to do. It just hasn't reached the top. And then she said to me, and if I'm going to be honest with you, I think so many people in my role, CHRO or chief people officers, do not know what design-led HR means. And I was like, oh my goodness, when is this going to change? It's really hard. And I'm not by any way bagging HR. I think everyone got into HR for the same reasons I did, to really improve the experience of work and to help organizations create better outcomes. I just think we've got the wrong tools, and we're also under-resourced on many occasions to even think about changing our tools and mindsets and ways of working, and also that big unlearning problem. But it's a challenge. The inertia is absolutely real, and I'm wondering, what is it going to take for organizations to truly invest in putting employees at the center and treating them like customers?
So I have run the project portfolio for HR departments for Fortune 50 companies. And I will tell you that one of the challenges is you get a bunch of things in front of you, and this is just a math problem, right? This is me saying, when I throw rocks, I'm throwing rocks at myself because I did this. I have to make a decision about what we're going to invest in. And the problem is that some of the things I'm investing in are risk reduction. Some of the things I'm investing in are cost reduction. Some of them are experience improvements. Well, I'd like to be able to compare them apples to apples. And so I'm going to convert them all to dollars. But I'm going to convert them to risk-adjusted dollars because I know that outsourcing or offshoring has a dollar value attached to it that is quite direct. But employee experience is quite indirect. And so when push comes to shove, it's not because I don't believe in employee experience. It's because it's a much less certain bet. And that's why I don't think these things can compete in the same project portfolio. It's part of the reason why I feel like they need to be separated into. There's a project portfolio that is for workers as a supply, right? As an input to production. And there needs to be a different budget and a different project portfolio for things to improve the product of work.
I hear you on that. And I speak to chief people officers every week. And one of the things I wonder, because chief people officers have huge project lists and initiative things that they're trying to get done, and a lot of pressure from boards and executive teams around what needs to be done. And I do wonder if they looked at their list critically and took half the things off it, whether employees would even notice. I think that we are spending so much time on, for example, the key moments that matter, those classic attraction, onboarding, recruitment, performance, engagement, exit, those key moments that matter across the life cycle. We spend so much time trying to design those experiences. And while they're really important, back of the envelope calculations for me say that an employee spends no more than 5% of their total employed time in all of those moments combined. The other 95% of their time, they're coming to work and just doing their job. So where's the investment in making work better? Where's the investment in the everyday tools, processes, systems that they have to interact with to improve their employee experience? But that actually doesn't sit in the HR remit. So I think we're totally on the same page around the design.
I was going to say, amen. That's
Yeah.
what I was going to say. Yeah, right. The way I express that is that a lot of what we do in designing the experience of HR is we're essentially patting the manipulator arm of the procurement function of HR. It's still a procurement function, it's still robotic, and it's still an arm, but we're going to make it a little less ouchy. And that's not actually when you interview people about what they want from work. Some of it is moments that matter in the HR world, but the huge majority is the rest of the day, the rest of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
We won't be able to get to all the stuff around EX curriculum if we go into all 7 principles of EX design that you have described in the manifesto. Anybody listening, you want to see all 7, go to exmanifesto.com. So pick your favorite. What's the one that maybe is pointiest or the one that could have the most influence?
I'm going to say, obviously, that I love them all and they're all really important. But if I had to pick one to go into, I think it's probably number 4, which is design with, not for employees. And it says co-design puts the needs of employees at the heart because no one knows their needs better than they do. And this one for me is so important because it comes down to not only prioritizing our investment, resources, effort, time on the right things because we ask employees what actually matters to them, but also when we go about initiatives, designing initiatives or improving processes or whatever we're doing, and we do it with employees, those things land, they resonate because they're being designed with the people that they're for. Core belief behind all the work that we do is the solutions we seek lie in the population we serve. We don't have to have the answers. Frankly, we don't have the answers. If we're saying we do, we're probably pretending. And so the only way to design for the problems, the challenges, the opportunities that face every organization today is to design with the people that they're for. So that's probably the one that I would really highlight. And it's been a game changer for me as a leader, knowing that I don't need to pretend that I know exactly what we should do next or where we should focus or how I do a particular thing, because the people that I'm doing it with will have really good contributions, and taking those into play always results in a better outcome.
One of the interesting things, I just had Phil Terry on the show. Phil Terry wrote this book, which is Customers Included. And a part of his point in there is that lots of product teams forget to include customers in design, and it results in epic disasters. And in fact, it's a fun book to read because if you like Schadenfreude, because you get to read, oh yeah, that was a bad product. That was terribly conceived. How could anybody have had the idea that that was going to be a good product? Well, it's because they were in a room alone.
Exactly. Our employees are coming to work with expectations set by their consumer experiences, by their experiences with their favorite products, their favorite apps, their favorite experiences. And then they come to work and it's so jarring because almost every experience that they have is not being designed with people like them. And so it feels like it's from the dark ages, or it's not as beautiful, slick, accessible, intuitive, all of those things as the experiences they have in their personal lives. But unfortunately, the bar's high because what's happening in their personal lives is moving.
Yes. Here's a question related to that. How much of the experience of work arrives via tools versus via people? Impossible question, but that's what I like to ask.
It's a great question. And I would just, as a guess, I would say, so if tools also included processes, systems, technology, like the way people do their job, I would say it's probably like 2/3 people, 1/3 tools. I think tools are really important because I would also put all the enablers of making doing your job not cumbersome. So don't have anything that's getting in the way of people being able to do their job with relatively ease. But so much of it is in the relationship you have with your manager, the relationship you have with your peers, the relationships you observe, the purpose of an organization, how you feel connected to that, knowing what success looks like as an individual in an organization, which is a conversation you have with your leader. Like so much of it is in the software experience of work.
I completely agree. I don't know of anybody who ever quit because the benefits portal was not intuitive. They quit because they feel betrayed or something much more human.
100%. And that's that promise versus reality. They expected one thing and they get something else. And every day, every employee shows up with some expectations that have been set by a combination of the expressed employee value proposition, what their leaders are saying, the strategy of the business, all of the things they see in the market about the business. They're turning up with expectations of how it should feel to work in that organization. And if there's a wild gap between what they expect and their reality, which is their experience, that's where people become disengaged and ultimately will leave.
So let's talk about the EX curriculum that you and your organization have created. How much of it is a design curriculum? And I guess there's a sub question there, which is what kind of design? Because there's service design and there's experience design. And so what kind of design are we talking about? And how much of it is actually bespoke to this problem space?
Really great question. So the curriculum is broken into three main parts. Sort of got the foundations, the more strategic kind of aspects of employee experience, and then what we call the moments that matter, which is really examples of how to apply the earlier learning. A lot of the upfront stuff, the foundations, is talking about design mindsets, which we have 7 mindsets that we teach in employee experience design. They're a combination of things that have been borrowed from UX because they're so awesome, and also some real specific design and more HRE kind of ones. And we introduced the double diamond, which is a classic design anywhere tool. And then we also introduced some frameworks that are specific really to employee experience. So we introduced a framework which we call PREP, which gives us a way to look at an organization, a team, or an individual and try and understand their experience. We break employee experience down into 4 types of experiences: purpose experiences, relationship experiences, enabling experiences, and performance experiences. And those buckets really are quite useful when we think about the experience of work, because it goes much broader than the life cycle or the moments that matter. So there's foundational stuff that we introduce that's very much HR reimagined. The program, while it does use some really foundational design methodology, it is very much context specific to employee experience, because we've built it to talk to the HR people leader in language that they'll understand, because there's a bunch of things that needs to be translated into this sort of design way of thinking. So it takes people through not only how to think differently, but how to do things differently, and gives people the confidence to try things in a new way.
I feel like the PREP model here, which is purpose, relationship, enabling, and performance. First of all, I'm so pleased to see relationship there. And it's something that I felt is not addressed by Joe Pine's progression of economic value, which is that work is not just a product. It's not just an offering. It's even an experience or a transformation. Part of work is a relationship. And I don't know of any discipline called relationship design. And so how do you teach that? What's in that?
I mean, why that's such a big bucket for us is because we know the importance of a relationship between an employee and their leader. We know the importance of feeling personally and professionally connected to our peers. And we also know the impact of observing toxic relationships in the organization. So relationships are so fundamental to having a great employee experience. And the way we use that PREP model often is it's great to kind of understand employee value proposition drivers. So why do people join your organization and maybe why they stay? And often people stay because of the relationships and because of who they're working with and how it feels to be connected. And so in terms of how you design for relationships or design for those connections, it's having the understanding that personal and professional connection is really important. Relationships with certain people in the organization are really important. So how do we go about designing experiences that strengthen those relationships? How do we go about designing experiences that mean people meet and build relationships with people at the right time in their experience of work, because you can't meet everyone and connect with everyone at once? And how do we give people the time and space to work on connections if that's actually one of the number one reasons they stay in your organization? People don't prioritize team building or team connection as something that's really important, but when they understand it's like the number one reason that they stay for some people, you're certainly going to go about designing experiences that help people to do that.
So I've studied it a little bit, and friendships are to some extent formed by hard times shared. Now, the military knows that. That's why during basic training, Army Rangers carry a telephone pole together every place they go for a week. It's because, you remember when you had to carry the telephone pole every time you wanted to go to the bathroom? So I don't know how to design that in a way that is ethical inside organizations. I mean, that's what things like rope courses are for. But honestly, it's hard projects. It's the work itself. You give people really hard projects to solve, and they solve them together, and they come out connected. So it doesn't have to be something you do at an offsite. It can be something that is done in the work itself.
100%. And that reminds me of something that Ian Roberts at Airbnb said to me recently. He said, let the work do the work. And it's so true. Like, you don't have to have team building for the sake of team building. Let the work of working together do the work of connection and belonging. And that is so true. If we design the experience of work well, then we're also going to get this experience of connection and improved relationships. And it needs to be so deliberate in this flexible working environment that we're in now.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Ian's also obviously a designer. He came from IDEO. I think he was there for 25 years or something. So love the fact that Airbnb's invested in him coming on board to really lead out the future of people at Airbnb.
Oh, that's very exciting. Let's talk about purpose in the PrEP model. The thing about purpose from my research is that everyone has a different one. And so there's a tendency to say, well, we're going to describe the purpose of the company, as opposed to looking at what each person is looking for. So how can that be a design activity?
When I think about purpose experiences, for me, another way of saying that is an individual's connection to the bigger picture. So am I coming to work and understanding how my everyday activities at work contribute to either fulfilling the purpose of the organization, contribute to the strategy of the organization, the particular goals that we've got on at any one time? The role of a leader is to connect individual employees to the bigger picture of the organization. And when individuals feel connected, of course, you're like more motivated and more energized to do your work because you can see how it contributes to the purpose, the strategy. So in terms of designing experiences that connect people to purpose, I mean, it's really embedding purpose, strategy, that broader context of the organization into the everyday activities of every team, not just the SLT. And this takes me to a really important point when it comes to employee experience design. If leaders provide their employees very strong context, that means understanding what the purpose is, what the strategy is, the particular goals that are priority for now, keeping the number one thing, what the constraints are. When leaders do a good job of that, and then they involve employees in the design of work, that is so powerful. Employees cannot provide really useful input if they don't have strong context. And so it's an important job of a leader to connect people to the bigger picture as part of broader context setting.
Colonel John Boyd spoke about the importance of mission command in the military. And the difference between mission command and whatever simple command was called is that simple command says, take hill X. Mission command says, well, look, we think you should take hill X, but that's because it overlooks this road. And what we're really trying to do is interrupt the supply that's flowing down that road. So whatever you can do to interrupt the flow of supply to that road, do it. And if it involves taking hill X, do that. And so it combines the idea of it's not just a simple command, it's tying it to purpose. And it gives way more range of freedom. By the way, for listeners who haven't heard me rant about Colonel John Boyd before, he reinvented military strategy in the 70s. But now I have to read a couple of things I found here, which is Boyd's said, in the military, it's people, ideas, and hardware in that order. He said, machines don't fight wars, terrain doesn't fight wars, humans fight wars. It's very, very interesting. He's an incredibly interesting, complicated thinker who I will not go into any further. But it just recalled to me this idea of mission. This is why we're doing things.
Critical context for employees, particularly when you're asking for them to contribute to how you run the organization.
Have you seen people come out of HR, go through this curriculum, and come out successfully the other side as experienced designers? And I'm going to ask it a different way. which is, do you see more success from designers coming into an employee experience design curriculum and coming out the other side as employee experience designers?
Oh, hard question.
It's a hard question. Yeah.
It's pointy. If I'm honest with you, I've seen more success with HR people coming out designers only because more HR people have done our program than designers have done our program. But I would say that HR folk have a harder time because there is so much unlearning to do. And also because of the challenges that I mentioned before around how an organization sees the service of HR. And so there's some personal unlearning, some personal confidence building and new muscle flexing. And then there's also re-skilling of the organization and repositioning of their role. Designers have an easier time because this is how they've been taught and they're really just learning some of the EX language and they're flying. I really do believe that we in HR absolutely need to adopt these ways of thinking. So we can't just not do it because it's hard. And the old ways of working already aren't working. So we're kind of going to be left with no choice soon.
I'll tell you the challenge I can see with people coming out of design. There's a lot of sexy things to design out there, and employee experience is not one of them. So maybe I'm underestimating that.
I actually know many designers now that are wanting to make a meaningful contribution. And particularly people that are coming out of UX design, they're like, I'm sick of thinking about where to put this button. I want to contribute to how people experience work. So there's really great people doing that. There's awesome HR teams that are bringing in heads of product. I know a couple of really great people in this space who have come from a product design background and now sitting in an HR team. I would say those people, honestly, at times can have a really hard time because they're coming up against a lot of barriers when they're trying to use their product design skill set within the HR team. But please don't give up if you're in that role because we need it. We need this support. We need this upskilling.
But product designers coming into that role, the product is work. That's the hard part, is that you're going to come into that role and you're going to be asked to work on the benefits portal. And it's not actually necessarily the thing. I'll tell you, this is an advertisement. I'm going to place an ad right now. And it's for the University of Toronto has produced a service design curriculum. Service design is interesting because there's no product at the center. And so Ali Hatfield, who's a co-author on something that is being published with me next year, helped to set up that curriculum. And I think it's very exciting, very modular. It might be an extension on your experience design course.
I love that, Dart. And Humankind, my professional services organization, which is an HR services organization or people and culture employee experience, we have had and have service design capability and experts on our team. Such a game changer for the way that we deliver our services. So I couldn't agree more. Service design is very applicable in this space.
Yeah, they've taught me a ton. Ali Hatfield and Connor Brewer. And a lot of it is that you're not designing a product, even though we're calling it a product. You have to design the service system that delivers experiences. It's a very different way of thinking. So, closing questions. I didn't prepare you for this at all, but you'll probably get them quicker than other people. What do you, Samantha, hire your work to do for you?
I love jobs to be done. It's awesome. Honestly, probably growth. I love to learn and I love to work with really smart people and be challenged and to grow my brain. And that's the job that I hire work for.
What kind of growth do you want most?
Two things come to mind. One is impact. So I really want to grow my capabilities so that I can have more impact out in the world. And the other, honestly, is in the relationships around me. I absolutely thrive on meeting incredible people and building connections and learning from them and sharing my experiences. And I've had such a privilege over the last few years to be able to meet so many amazing people that are now, many of them are becoming really good friends. So yeah, it's probably relationships and impact.
Could we design your work better for those two things?
I mean, 100%. I'm a founder with ADHD. So let's be honest, the design of my work is not wonderful. I am actually in just a bit of a process right now of like really thinking about how I want to approach 2025. work-wise, because I think I could be doing that better.
We're going to have to meet separately. I will have you do a solo bubble chart. I think you saw the bubble chart in the article. A solo bubble chart is a very interesting thing to do.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah, okay, we'll do that.
Cool.
Okay, we'll totally do that. What does your work cost you?
Time with my family, probably the top one. I've got 3 sons, and as a founder and business owner, I've worked a lot. And I love what I do, but the biggest cost to that would be time with my kids.
Do you get more out of your work than you put in?
I do, definitely, 100%. I don't want to say that work's my main thing because I have a family and I have other things that I love, but I love what I do and always have been so passionate about helping others to love what they do as well, because I really think it's a choice. And if you don't love what you do, change it. We spend so much time doing it, and that's something that I want for everyone.
Are there any companies out there today that you would hope your kids worked at?
Oh my gosh. Such a good question. Recency bias. I literally ran a masterclass this morning, or a fireside chat actually this morning, with the head of people from a company called Koto. It's a New Zealand-based ethical clothing manufacturer going out to the world. Amazing company, amazing founder. And she's an EX designer, so she's using EX design to improve the experience of work there. But not only are they so purpose-driven, really good for the planet, commercially very successful, but also really care about their people. I mean, that's an example of a company that's top of mind because I spoke to her only a couple of hours ago. And it's a beautiful company, really doing good for all stakeholders, employees, the planet, and shareholders. And let's have more examples like that.
Okay, this is an interesting question. Add on to that. Are you seeing a little more traction with B corporations than you are with standard corporations?
Not necessarily, actually. The B Corp values really align with what we do, but I don't know if it's outstanding levels of more traction.
Just Kodo sounded very B Corp-y.
They do. They are a B Corp.
Yeah.
They absolutely are. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on the show today. Where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Connect with me on LinkedIn. I love that platform. So Samantha Gadd, and also excellent.io is the platform where we do the learning for employee experience design. Love to have a conversation with anyone that's interested in chatting all things EX design. Thank you so much for having me, Dart. It's been a very enjoyable conversation. I know we're going to have more conversations, so looking forward to it.
For me too, and I totally agree. Yeah, I think we are going to. Great talking to you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Dart.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio, for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.